Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Wellness of Madness podcast. I am your host, Lore. Some of you guys know me as Coach Lore. I am a behavior change specialist, a nutritionist, and a health coach. And on today's episode, I'm really excited because we are kicking off 2021 with a very special episode about cannabis. And joining me on this episode is an extraordinary woman who I'm very, very happy to call my friend. She is an artist, a cannabis marketing specialist, and medical cannabis advocate. It is Kate Jestin Taylor. Kate has worked with some of the largest cannabis companies over the last 5 years in California, including Jetty Extracts, VETCBD, VapeXhale, PAX Labs, and Dark Heart Nursery. Kate now runs her own freelance art and marketing firm, Canis Artifex. So what are we waiting for? Let's bring her right in. Hello, Kate.
Hello.
Hi, Kate.
How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking your time to come in and talk to us about cannabis. How are you doing, Kate?
I'm doing great. I will take any occasion, and of course, any occasion to see you. But, I love talking about weed. It's my favorite subject. So I was really excited that you asked me to be on. So happy to be here.
Hell yeah. I'm really excited to say that the cannabis episodes that we had on season 1 was one of the most downloaded episodes. So I definitely wanted to talk about cannabis. But again, that is definitely not my specialty. I've been very open about the fact that I recently, or not recently, but at 25 or so started consuming cannabis, and it has benefited me a lot. So I'm glad to have someone like you on board. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the different jobs you've done in the industry?
Sure. So I actually started off being what they call in the industry as a dab tender. This is pre-legalization days. It was purely medical. And I literally got to go around with the first brand I worked with, VapeXhale. They're a fantastic vaporizer company. And I would go to events and just dab people out, get people super stoned and talk to them. And it was the Wild West back then. It was so much fun. And we had great times and so many just good people coming together to consume the plant. It was like being a kid in a candy shop and getting paid to be there.
So actually, for people that don't know, what exactly is dabbing?
Oh, yeah. So it's the extract form. It's basically when all the flowers get either pressurized or, through a chemical process to extract all the THC. And it's somewhat in a crumbly, crystally form, depending on how you extract it. So it's kind of like, to use a poor alcohol association term, like it's like the shots instead of like a nice craft beer. It's very potent. It can get you very stoned. And if you're not new, or if you're new to cannabis, don't dab until you're farther down the line.
Until you know what you're doing. Can it be compared to like the distillation of alcohol?
Yeah, actually, one of the most commonly used things is distillate. It's just the pure THC form, and it kind of feels like an oil. You can mix it in with food, or just lick it if you want, because it's already activated. But it's just it's professional level, I guess.
Yeah.
But those were mainly events that real true cannabis advocates were at. It was the early days. You really needed to go through a stringent process to get the recommendation in California. So it was primarily, compassion events. So many dispensaries at the time would host, free education days, free testing days for people like, the homeless population in San Francisco, or veterans with PTSD. It was such a compassionate, free program that so many brands at the time worked in. So I was lucky to be a part of it, because I was dabbing out old grannies that had been there in the 80s, during the AIDS epidemic, and they were making pot brownies with their friends. Yeah. It was a real true part of history. I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, that was for about 2 years before legalization happened. And then everything changed. It became very corporate. I started working for one of the biggest vape companies in California, Jetty Extracts, as a brand ambassador. That's what they kind of became known as. I eventually started leading the team, and then became their field events manager. So at my favorite industry, I guess champion of my career was getting to organize the first legal cannabis sale at Outside Lands festival in San Francisco, because it was the first and only year, because of the pandemic, that they allowed cannabis sales at Outside Lands. And I managed that entire promotion in grasslands for Jetty Extracts. And it was just the most amazing. I mean, as a music junkie and as a weed junkie, it was just like literally the best thing I've ever done.
That sounds like quite a mission. I mean, I can't imagine, because it's a lot of people. I've never been, but I know it's a huge event. And you're saying that it was the first legal event? Like, it was actually legit?
Yeah. So it was the second event that had gotten a license from the state of California for like a consumption event. That's what they were called. The first one was Northern Nights Festival, which I also attended with Jetty up in Humboldt. It was more of like an electronic festival. So the draw for weed wasn't, quite as pronounced as it was in Outside Lands. Cause I mean, I think it's the biggest music festival in the country by ticket sales. So, I mean, there were 50,000 people there, in Golden Gate Park, and there were thousands of people in grasslands at any given time. And man, there's just no more satisfying feeling than like being at a concert, just smoking a vape or a joint or whatever your fancy is, and just, being allowed to like not be tripping about it. I'm from Jersey. I grew up in a place that was like super, super prohibitive. I used to buy weed in tinfoil. It was super sketch, not good.
So actually, that leads me to my next question. Before you tell us a little bit more of where this journey has taken you as a career, how has cannabis helped you, and how did that transform into you working in the industry?
Yeah. So, well, this is a mental health podcast, so I think it's a good place to start there. I have generalized anxiety disorder. I have binge eating disorder, and I've just had chronic depression my whole life. But I actually discovered how great it was for me through the medical reasons. My family and I suffer through chronic migraines, and I basically spent my entire childhood crippled by 2-3 day long migraines once a month, if not more often, like up until I basically started smoking weed every day around 18. And it was the only thing. I've tried 4, 5, 6 different headache medications. Nothing worked for me. And I felt like there was just something broken in my brain that could never get fixed, and I was just going to suffer through this my whole life. But luckily, I, just through friends in New Jersey, I'm artistic. I've always had friends that were either musicians or artists like me. And, I just kind of fell into it. It wasn't really something I did a lot when I was super young. I did at least have the common sense to be like, okay, like I probably shouldn't smoke every day at 15, just for brain development. I was lucky to have a therapist for a stepdad who, always advocated for, and got me grounded a couple times because he caught me, but he did leave a good impression on responsible cannabis use. And then it just turned into immediate advocacy for me. I went from having 2 migraines a month and almost not graduating high school on time because I missed so much school, to literally being pain-free, like overnight. I noticed a difference within about a week. I pretty much stopped having migraines, with the exceptional maybe once a year now that I do now. So it really completely transformed my life. And I was lucky. I got an early shipment of California Medical when I was in college through an unnamed source who mailed it to us. And it was so potent compared to the New Jersey, New York weed that I'd been smoking at the time that I was like, there is something to this. I must have been smoking maybe 10-12% THC in New Jersey because it was potent enough to get you high, but like by California standards was almost nothing, and I came here, moved here, super motivated. Literally the day I moved to California, I went and got my recommendation and went to a dispensary that day because I was like, this is what I'm here for. Like, other than the beautiful weather and great people, but it was a huge draw for me. And just fell in love and wanted to be a part of it.
So definitely the migraines, and you said that was chronic. So and for a lot of people, a migraine is not a headache. We experience headaches. A migraine is a whole nother story. There could be vomiting involved, nausea. It's unimaginable. So let's go a little bit back to those other mental health issues that you're talking about. We're talking about depression. We're talking about generalized anxiety. First off, were you diagnosed with these disorders, and how has it helped you in that department?
Sure. Yeah. I was going to mention that I haven't been formally diagnosed with depression, but it's kind of one of those things where it when you see it, and if you're stuck in bed for 2-3 days, and you WebMD it, there's a good chance that you're having a depressive episode. But I was formally diagnosed with generalized anxiety. I have been seeing a therapist who is very pro cannabis use and actually pro psychedelic use for my mental health. I'll get into that later. But I've had an eating disorder my whole life. I've been seeing therapists on and off basically since I was about 13. I've managed to, for the most part, be pretty, I'd say, cured. Definitely was in recovery from binge eating for several years, and I'm in a much better, healthy mental place. But cannabis, actually, because it makes you eat a lot, has been a struggle for me within that department because, it helps. I think you might actually be the good one to ask for this. It affects the enzyme that promotes hunger sensations, right? Yeah. So for me, that was an issue.
I bet, actually, it's something that I deal with too. Not so much of a binge eating disorder. I've never really had an eating disorder, but I have obsessive compulsive disorder. So I form very obsessive and very compulsive relationships with everything. And that includes food. So for instance, I went through surgery, and because I couldn't consume much fat, I start being fearful of food. So now that I am better, I have to eat more fat, but now I'm scared to do so. And then you start getting like anxiety, behind it. So, it trickles down. So it definitely, I agree with you. It does help in certain areas. Like it helps my tics. It really does. But in the eating part, that's the tough part, because same thing. You're just like, oh, I'm just so hungry. And actually I was going to ask that, how does it affect your anxiety? Because in my experience, it's great when it's great, but it almost feels like a mountain. Sometimes I'll consume it and I'll smoke it and I'll be like, yes, this is great. I don't have all those feelings. Sometimes it's worse than it was before. And I start getting really anxious, and it just makes everything 100 times worse. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's dose dependent, but it's also biologically dependent. You mentioned in your other science podcast that your brain chemistry, your biochemistry really does affect how it affects your brain. And that's 100% true. I mean, you could take two people who are the same weight and have it completely different experiences. So it's not weight dependent. It's biochemically dependent. But for me, I mean, it really has helped my anxiety and depression on a very intense level. I think it helps normalize a lot of, I definitely have some deficiencies in that area. I have a family history of alcoholism. I have a family history of anxiety and depression on both sides. So I know those things run in my family. And so for me, I am very aware that when I do smoke, I feel normal. I feel better. I feel like I'm so much more able to handle life stresses, because I'm also a highly sensitive person. And so if I'm having a bad day, I mean, other people know about it. But if I take a bong rip before diving into an intense family discussion or something, I am hundreds of times more pleasant. My own mother has even told me that I am more pleasant when I am high, and made a point of telling me that so that I show up a little medicated and a little chilled out, because it truly normalizes me. And I know that that's not the case for everyone though, but that's the case for me.
Okay, I love it. So actually this let's get into these questions right off the bat, because I know that most people listening maybe do have a relationship with cannabis. But for those people that are listening that kind of feel the stigma, I do want to get these questions out of the bag early. Have you had any negative side effects? And can we talk a little bit about lung health? Because this is one of the side of cannabis that worries me as far as smoking, what's called the stoner cough and all those issues. So let's talk a little bit about the negative side, to be fair.
Absolutely. And I think that's 100% a valid way to present it, because like we've said, it's not for everyone, and it does affect you for sure. I mean, ironically, the biggest way it affects me is it actually kills my creativity. And as an artist, you'd think it would help. I know plenty of people that have, great influences by it, are inspired by it. But for me, it just kills whatever creative drive I have in my brain. And so I cannot smoke at all when I'm creating, which is ironic for me. But also, motivation, the lazy stoner stereotypes sometimes exist because there's a grain of truth in it. And for me, if I do over medicate or too early in the day, I need to like limit it to like afternoons and evenings, like when the work is done, because I just become somewhat apathetic and feel very, at peace and in tune and want to like focus on that feeling and not really be productive. So for me, I definitely have to be aware of my productivity levels before, during, and after. So,
It's funny that you mentioned that because I am the same way. If I consume it, I'm not very creative at all. So I think a lot of my creativity comes from my chaos. And if I calm it down, there's nothing there and it makes me more anxious. So same thing, I like to get all my stuff done. And once it's like, okay, your body needs to relax and you need to chill. So I think it is important to tell people that there is a time and whatever works for you. And it's true, on the science part, it does affect your motivation. So it's not a motive, it's not a I don't want to say drug, but it's not something to use for motivation. Maybe some people, I've heard that some people do, but maybe figuring out how it works for you is very important before we go and judge something, right? Just like anything else. Let's talk a little bit about lungs. Have you had any issues with lung health?
I've definitely noticed that if I buy a very inexpensive but still legal cartridge, it does affect my ability to like increase my lung capacity. Like I notice, like if I work out or go running and I've been vaping a lot, it is much more phlegmy for me. I kind of get like a little gross. I don't actually experience that as much as with combustion, like with just the burning the flower in a joint or something. I would like to think I'm a little lucky in that because I know it does affect some people, but I think just because I've been using it for so long, I don't really notice the effects because I've been smoking for almost 15 years now. And, I do try to keep my lungs healthy. I do run a lot. I take my dogs for a walk every day. And I do try to keep my body healthy. So I might not be the right person to suggest that. I think if people never smoked in their entire life and they're maybe 50 years old exploring cannabis, they might be more sensitive to that feeling. If that makes any sense, but I know it does affect it. I'm not going to like just sit here and say that it doesn't. It 100% does. I just am probably a bit more numb to it than the average new user because of my just near constant use of it.
Yeah. And luckily, in this case, there are different ways of consuming cannabis. So if you don't really want to, inhale plant matter, there's edibles. There's just a ton of different things that you can do. So that's really nice.
Yes, the technology with cannabis has come so far in the last few years. Pro tip that I really think a lot of people don't know: with lotions and balms, if there's THC in it, you will not get high, but you will still receive the painkiller effect of THC because it's not processed through your liver and lungs the same way it is with ingestion and smoking. So THC is a better painkiller. I just want that to be well known, and it should be used as a catalyst with CBD for the ultimate pain effect. If you're looking to treat chronic pain, that's the pro combo, is like a 5-to-1 CBD to THC ratio.
Beautiful tip, Kate. Thank you so much. That is super good to know. And that's why we're here today, because we want to educate. So before we go through a little brief history of cannabis, which Kate's going to guide us through, let's talk about a role that I do call one of my specialties. And I know it's one of yours too, because we're mixing it together. Let's talk about social justice and cannabis, because it does come together quite a bit. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about social justice and cannabis and how it is connected in ways?
Sure. It's one of my favorite topics because I truly believe cannabis justice is social justice. It's a preventative measure for mental health. I mean, being able to treat your body the way you want to and have the autonomy to do so is, I think, a universal human right. But beyond that, I'll go to the tail end of the history I was going to give you guys about the American Prohibition Era. It started around the same time as alcohol prohibition, in the early 1920s, and basically got just nothing but racist undertones from William Randolph Hearst. He was the newspaper magnate, and he basically owned the media and millions of dollars of timber interests in California. And because he wanted to protect those timber interests, he got very paranoid because the hemp industry was known for millennia for textiles, paper. I mean, the Declaration of Independence drafts was written on hemp paper. So just it was ingrained in the American lifestyle from the colonial days. And he's just decided he didn't want that competition. So he blamed, during the Great Depression, the huge influx of Mexican immigrants coming in and stealing jobs. We've heard that one before, and basically demonized it, completely demonized it. He helped fund movies like Reefer Madness, which basically turned cannabis into this scary thing where men will rape women. That's literally what they said. Cannabis caused Mexican men to rape women, which couldn't be farther from the truth. It's totally insane and completely invalidates all the thousands of years of scientific research that's gone into its medicinal properties. So that basically led to the Marijuana Tax Act, which completely gutted all cannabis and hemp sales in America. And it was just seen as this racist thing by white America. And that's who was running the show at the time, was just a bunch of old white men in America who felt scared by the fact that the hippies were using it and that African Americans were using it in the 60s. And that basically led to the Controlled Drugs Act because Timothy Leary, he is a fantastic psychonaut and LSD advocate. He got arrested for marijuana that wasn't even in his car. And got basically, it's actually the worst thing that could have ever happened, because he ended up repealing the Marijuana Tax Act and ended the Controlled Substances Act, which is what placed THC and CBD on Schedule 1. Because Nixon, it's really Nixon's fault. He is the one who organized it in the modern era and started the war on drugs, which disproportionately affects BIPOC populations, Latinx communities, and basically anyone who's not a white man. And the private prison industry and the prison lobbyist unions all across America for over 40 years basically bought the illegality of it with our governors and statesmen, because they wanted to protect their interests, because the cops, because the war on drugs was going after those people. So that's the reason millions and millions of falsely incarcerated nonviolent drug offenders are in jail to this day, even though, you know what, there's a lot of rich white dudes in California running cannabis companies, but no one's going after them. It's really just a form of social control. And it's really sad, because it's literally the greatest gift I think the plant-based medicine has given us. And it's just to keep people down, because also I think people like Richard Nixon were really afraid of people having a key to the door of perception, as the Doors put it, because cannabis expands your mind. It heals you. It helps bring you to a higher dimension, and people were really afraid of people getting that information.
And to piggyback on that history that was happening in United States, you mentioned the drug war, the big drug war that started in the 80s. I'm going to take you guys on a little road of what happened in Mexico at that time, because marijuana in Mexico is something that is very, very, it's very 50-50. We've been using it forever. I grew up seeing it in my aunt's drawers in alcohol that they would rub on you for any pain that we had, right? We knew that people smoked it, but it's looked a certain way. And it has also created huge problems. This is me seeing this happen. What began happening in the 80s is that we had different cartels in different areas. And yes, it was bad, but there wasn't as much crime. They grew the weed, they sold the weed, and that was about it. Mexico was still not in the cocaine part of drugs or anything. We were just mainly selling weed. What happened is the CIA got involved, and they wanted to bring 300 different people, 100 from Colombia, 200 from Mexico, to train to go into Mexico and get rid of these cartels. Unfortunately for them, was that a plan or not? I don't know. 200 of them turned rogue, and they became the Zetas, which is one of the biggest cartels in Mexico known today. The Zetas have wreaked havoc. A lot of people believe that it was a plan. Who knows? I don't know about that. However, I do know that what happened then, and I'm sure people have watched Narcs, the show, and it mirrors history. But what began happening is that instead of having a bunch of little cartels, mainly in Guadalajara, some in Sinaloa, it became a huge war because they knew that the best way to get money is to bring the weed into United States. That was it. That was the market. They knew that was the way to go. That was the way to get rich. So what began happening has just been an onslaught. And being part of what happened in my city of Orizaba is that when the narcs arrived in 2005, is that they would go up to the Sierras where the natives lived and usually grew different things like corn or nopales and different things like that, is that they would come up. They would take the land from the people, they would burn the crops, and they would start planting wheat. So that is a big problem. And one of the reasons that I never, ever did cannabis or any other drugs was because I knew that I would be consuming something that has killed my own people. You know, they go up there, they rape the women, they kill children, and this is just what's happening till this day. There are 66,000 people missing. There are over 13,000 people missing just in my city alone in Orizaba. And my best friend Pepe was one of them who went missing in 2015. So this is an issue, and that is where the real problem is, because maybe a psychedelic that can help mental health or cannabis that can help mental health, it has to come from the right place, because we don't want to know that we're in a party having fun and we're consuming something that sacrificed so many people in another country. And you know, in this case, it's my country. So of course, I'm very connected to that fact. So social justice and cannabis, just like Kate mentioned, are just intertwined. And the problem is that people put the stigma on the plant because of all of these reasons, but we are ignoring the properties of the plant itself. So Kate, do you agree that education plays a huge role in cannabis policy and acceptance?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, the whole reason it's illegal in the first place is just because of racist ideology, and not the literally thousands of years of history where, let me just go over briefly how cannabis has influenced every major religion since the dawn of time. It was found in Chinese burial chambers 5,000 years ago. It was used by the ancient Egyptians in worship of the sun god Ra. They believe that there was a mistranslation in the Old Testament, and that cannabis, was actually mistranslated from a different plant, but they believe that cannabis oil was in Jesus's anointing oil. I mean, it makes, there's a story and 12th century paintings of Jesus with a cannabis leaf next to him healing someone of blindness. And we know now, thanks to modern medicine, that it treats glaucoma. So you tell me if that's a mistake or not. You know, like, was Jesus being racist? They even mention in the Bible, every plant is okay in God's kingdom, or I'm loosely paraphrasing. But what I'm saying is that the scientific background goes back beyond most things people have studied. I mean, it's older than the wheel. How is it not something that we should be using every day? The nutritional benefits alone. I'm sorry, I totally went off track.
No, I love it. It's a very passionate subject. Trust me, just as passionate as you are. I am very passionate about the social justice part because I want to fix it. You know what I mean? I want us to be able to consume this phenomenal plant if it makes you feel better, if it helps you in any way. But I want to fix the social injustices, from people that are in jail that shouldn't be in jail to people like my best friend who are gone because of these stupid crime cartels, you know, and it's all about this one thing that there's a lot of drugs that we're fighting for, but I agree with you. It is really frustrating. So we do become very impassioned with it. So why don't you, since you were in the history part, why don't you give us a little brief history on cannabis?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely dabbled a little bit around it. But the last thing before I go into the history, I will say is, if there's anyone who's listening to this who does know someone who works in the industry, ask them why they feel so passionate about it. Odds are they will say they have seen firsthand the medical benefit of it. And if you can just go past the DARE education you got when you were little, the basically whitewashed version of history, and just really go and look at the true source of information, then you will see that it is like, so like the fact that it's been banned is actually very, very recent in its history. Like I said, it's only been in the last 100 years. Before that, like I said, it was part of the foundation of most big religions we know today, with the exception of Islam, but that's because they prohibited any intoxicants of any kind, with the distinct exception of the Sufis and Sikhs, who used hash as a form of worship in their services. Literally every possible big culture had it brought to them, either through trade or religion. I kind of mentioned the Old Testament references and stuff. Those came from the Scythians, who were the Aryan people. I'm sorry, not Aryan, Iranian people, and later would become the Persian Empire. I mean, that's where hookahs came from. Hookahs weren't originally a tobacco product. It was literally used to smoke hash. And then tobacco came later, because tobacco was from the New World. It came from North America, so there's no way a hookah could have been used to smoke tobacco before, the transatlantic trade started. So crazy things, but a couple other things from cannabis history that have always stuck with me as interesting. The word assassins actually come from the Middle Ages in the Middle East also, because there were Sunni, I believe it's Sunni, warriors who were trained very highly to go in stealthily and basically assassinate people, and this is what we know. But the word assassin comes from hashassin, which was because they smoked hash before going into battle, the same way Europeans used alcohol the night before battles, as a form of getting closer to God, a way of centering themselves, before getting the job done. So I always thought that was fascinating. But basically, you can trace it being evangelized as a medical product since in basically any part of the world. Let's see what else. I will say, like the Middle East kind of brought it closer and closer to Europe, and then it kind of went to Europe, but it actually wasn't widely accepted or used as a psychedelic there, or mind-altering substance, which is kind of weird. But it actually came to the New World as a utilitarian plant, like I briefly mentioned with U.S. history. The early English monarchy required it as a colonial crop to be grown, and it was brought over on the Mayflower because of its high-level use in textiles and the like. So it really is so entrenched in human history, and so much of that is forgotten. Let's see what else. I mean, it literally, like I said, George Washington was a hemp farmer. He was actually a very wealthy hemp farmer because of how much hemp he grew. It was used for rope and textiles and everything, like I've already said. But I mean, it literally was a medical thing you could buy in a drugstore up until the 1900s, because they used tinctures, alcohol-based tinctures. They would often mix it with opium and morphine as an anesthetic in surgeries, especially in Victorian times. So it's, wow. Yeah, the medical history goes back to literally everywhere at any point in time. There is a culture that used it and loved it, including itself.
Yes. And you know what I want to tell people? Thank you for giving us that brief history. I want to tell people, read history. And this is why it's so important to know your history, right? Because if we don't know what happened in our past, they can feed us any story. Okay. Yep. It's very important to do your own research, to read history. Start with the things that you like, especially if there's kids listening. If you like anything, read the history on that, and then you can widen your perspective on it. Actually, in our culture, it was used for a very, very long time, including peyote and ayahuasca. But another issue here that mixes in with history and social justice is that anything that we did prior to the conquista of Spain is looked upon as savagery. You know, even though we are close to nature, anything, since we're in a caste system, anything like that is looked as savage. And we need to come to terms with what our culture is and stop this European whitewashed horrible history that they're feeding us, because then we cannot connect with the things that actually mean something to us, you know? So again, it just keeps going in between the lines, man. It's crazy. Thank you so much for that brief history. That was excellent. With that, I want to go into a little bit of science. Even though we have a couple episodes that you guys can check out and see a little bit more of science behind cannabis and CBD, why don't you still give us a little bit of a brief science part to cannabis?
Yeah. Well, one of the most early things that people discovered about cannabis is that it treats inflammation. And like you mentioned in your previous episodes, it treats inflammation because those molecules can, what was the word you used? Like when they're like in those chemical reactions. I'm sorry, my brain is like,
oh, it's okay. No, don't worry about it. I probably don't remember the word I used either.
So essentially any organ in the body and any system in the body, because endocannabinoid receptors are literally in every part of our body and every organ system, which is why it has such a wide range of applications. But one thing I did want to mention that I noticed was not lacking, but needed to be spoken about a bit more in the previous episodes was the Entourage Effect with terpenes and different cannabinoids. And you touched upon it briefly with the full spectrum oil. And I 100% am a huge advocate. If you want to take something for a medicinal purpose, only full spectrum is what you need. And what full spectrum means is that they basically haven't pulled out all the extra chemicals and compounds that are found in the plant, because the distillation process, as you mentioned briefly, basically pulls that out and throws it out aside from the THC and CBD. But if you include all the terpenes and other cannabinoids like CBG, is great for gut health. CBN is great for sleeping, Delta 8, Delta 9, THC, all those different compounds basically work in concert together in your body to promote all these different things. I mean, cannabis is also an antiviral. There's research right now being done to see if cannabis can be used as an anti-COVID treatment. I am not saying anything, but I'm just suggesting that there is, I'm not suggesting, I'm telling that there is research being done right now, and they have very promising results that suggest that because of certain strains, antiviral compounds, it can be used as a potential anti-COVID tool.
Wow. That is, it's amazing, but it's not surprising, because the more we look into cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, which again is not in our medical books, and it is a real thing for all of those watching and listening who still don't understand. It's very, very feasible that we could potentially help many other viral and bacterial infections. So I'm glad that you did mention that. Something that you brought up to me when we were, talking, which I found fascinating, was cannabis therapeutics in other mammals and animals. So I really want to get into that. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, my little stars of the show here are on my bed, which is why I wanted to present it this way. All three of them have used CBD oil in some form or another to treat one specific thing or another. My dog, the one that's sleeping over there, she has very bad separation anxiety. So I give her a pretty standard dose for her weight, which is about 6 milligrams CBD before leaving the house. And she just chills out. She doesn't cry. She doesn't bark. She used to bark for hours. I'm not joking, like hours, making her voice hoarse, kind of barking. She's a very anxious dog. But when I give her CBD, it's like, bye, I'll see you later. I'm chilling, like no issue. My cat, he's a bit hard to see there. He is 15 years old, and he's a black cat, so he's a little hard to see on the blanket. He's actually he's suffering through stomach cancer right now. But in concert with his chemotherapy, I've given him a high dose of CBD every day. And I'm telling you, Laura, on the days I forget or don't give him enough or something, or give it at a wrong time, I can see the effects on him. I mean, he literally struggles to get up. He barely eats. This is keeping him from wasting away through chemotherapy, because it's keeping his appetite up. It's keeping his joints lubricated and in less pain. And his coat is so shiny. So the point of what I'm trying to say is anything you can treat yourself with CBD or THC, you can treat them, because like you mentioned in those episodes, those cannabinoid receptors are inside every mammal on Earth. So there's research being done right now, and I was actually lucky to work with one of the companies that did it, VETCBD. They're literally trying to prove that CBD oil should be used as the same therapeutic tool with animals. And so in California dispensaries, they sell a full spectrum CBD oil that's a tincture with olive oil, so easy on the stomach. And that's what they take, and it changed their life. Collie also extremely anxious. She's a feral cat. She's the calico. If I give it to her in her food, it's like a different cat. She's friendly. She's calm. She used to go and freak out and hide for days. That doesn't happen anymore.
Wow. And well, I was gonna say I did give my dogs a little bit, and I need to stick to it because I really want to see that, And we have a really anxious husky who definitely could use some. But I did like that they were eating a little bit more, and I noticed that right off the bat. I don't know if it was maybe because they were less anxious or what was going on, but they were definitely had a bigger appetite. So that was pretty cool to see. I definitely want to keep using it. Something else you had mentioned, which was just so cool to hear, is, and I don't remember exactly how you put it, but just kind of the expansion of consciousness of animals. And I like that you're an artist. So I see that coming together because most of your art is completely about animals, which I love. So talk to us about the expansion of consciousness of animals.
Yeah, I mean, humans obviously have been trying to expand their minds since the dawn of time. Does that mean that any other smart, conscious animal it lacks the ability to do that? I have always believed since I was a little girl that animals are far more intelligent and conscious than we give them credit for. I have seen incredible relationships firsthand of animals. I mean, I have bonded with tigers. I used to work at a zoo, and just seeing the level of understanding in their eyes and the communication, the nonverbal, because think about it, in any animal or even organism that's not us, the primary mode of communication is biochemical. It's how hormones exist. It's how smells exist. That is a form of communication. And just because we're not speaking those words doesn't mean that communication isn't there. So one of the things I have literally spent so much of my life researching, because I just think it's so fascinating, is the fact that animals seek out mind-altering substances the same way humans do too. Jaguars in the Amazon have been found, and I believe recorded, tripping balls, for lack of a better term, because they ate psychedelic mushrooms. And the same jaguars went back multiple times, which means they enjoyed the experience so much that they remembered where it was and seeked it out another time. Really cool historical little tidbit. Fly agaric is a poisonous mushroom that... poisonous. It's a neurotoxin in high doses, but plenty of people take it and are fine. It's a mushroom that grows in Siberia. Elk and reindeer also live in Siberia and have been known for centuries to eat it. And humans in crazy times used to drink their pee because the chemical psilocybin would be processed out through the pee. And literally there were records of humans consuming the reindeer pee to get high the same way the reindeers did to save the psilocybin. And craziest part of all was the psilocybin stories from Siberia. Actually, there's a theory, and I think it's pretty true, is the origin of Santa Claus and flying reindeer is because some Russians back in the day were tripping balls around Christmas time and literally made that story up. And then guess what? It became part of the Christmas culture eventually over hundreds of years. But look at Santa's suit. He's a red suit with white accents. Look at a fly agaric on Google. It is a red mushroom with white spots.
Wow. Wow, that is unbelievable. I definitely that's crazy. And it's funny that you mentioned that because it's again, it's such a big part of different cultures. Yeah. We in Mexico, we have peyote, and that's one of the ones we use the most. And one of the things that happens is if you go to Oaxaca or certain areas where they do journeys, is that you go in and they will give you the dose for yourself. And then they'll give you a small, let's say like a clay figure. And usually it'll already have an animal on it, which they think is your alebrije or your spiritual animal. And you'll go into your journey. And when you come back from your journey, you beat it with the colors that you saw. So you end up with this beautiful animal beaded, and that's your spirit animal. One of the experiences that I have, and I'm lucky enough that I'm going to have one of these people that were with me on that experience coming up in another episode about spirituality, was that when I was in Orizaba, we have these baths that are pre-Hispanic that are called temazcales. And basically you go up to the mountains and you build a temazcal, which is like a little hut. And inside you have herbs and it's hot and you sweat everything out and you come back and you come out and you put cold water over you. And it's a spiritual kind of bath that we take. But I went with several artisans that were very connected with nature. And once we got to that mountaintop, it was really high, probably the highest one I've ever been to. And we're going to set up camp. He starts asking nature for permission. Like, hey, you know, we're going to be here. We're going to set a temazcal. So we're going to ask and pray for permission. And I can't wait to have him on because I've told the story many times and I don't think many people believe me. A panther showed up. Now, we have a lot of panthers. We have black panthers where I'm from. And I nearly pissed my pants because I've never seen an animal so close. So like that kind of an animal so close to me ever. Yeah. And he walked by and it wasn't like a huge one. It was like a skinny guy. It wasn't this massive thing. But I was like, oh, man. So he walks up to it and kneels down to its level and is just having this moment with the panther, asking permission, you know, that we're going to settle in here. He was able to touch the forehead of the panther. Then the panther walked around pretty much all of us and left. We were there for the whole night. And then the next day, nothing ever bothered us. And it was majestic. And back then I was about 15. I was very like scientific. Like even though my grandma had brought us up connected to nature, I had become very apathetic for many reasons. I was just a dick, you know? So to see that was like, what? Like it was amazing. So I love that you brought up animal consciousness and some of our cultures are very, very attached to nature and very attached to animals. And you're absolutely right. Just because we don't communicate the same way doesn't mean they are stupid, you know, they're not. So
the last one I wanted to mention before we move on, sorry to interrupt, but I'm just so excited. I need to tell you this. I recently, and because you're from Mexico, I wanted to ask you about this. The Sonoran desert toad and the psychedelic toxin venom that it shoots out. Have you seen those? Have you experienced those? Have you talked to anyone?
No, you know what? I do know one person that had an experience with it because I didn't know this. They call them los Lamas Apples, and because some people lick them.
Yeah.
Yes, which is crazy. I'd never experienced that. I've never seen them, but he had told us the story, and he was one of the artisans that he used to go on psychedelic journeys, and he was a very wise man, like honestly, just a very, very wise man. And he said that he went to Sonora and had un Lamas Apple, and it was like one of the, he said that it was very close to ayahuasca. It was a very like harsh journey where he kind of saw all his demons and was sick for a couple of days, but it kind of helped him go through that stage of change. So that's all I know about it, but it's pretty wild. We've got some wild animals and psychedelics.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder, like, is that toad, does it have psychedelic experiences if it eats its own venom? Do other animals seek those out? Because I believe it's chemically similar to DMT, the venom. So if it's used as a defense mechanism, there are other animals out there who've experienced that poison, including us. And Exactly. It makes you wonder, like, do they seek it out? Do they eat the toads to get the venom and to trip? Like, it's cool.
It is really cool. And I really like that you are an artist and all of your art, if not most of your art, is centered around animals. So tell us a little bit about your process as an artist and also just your art in general. Tell us where we can find it. Where can we seek it out?
Sure. So my Instagram handle is Canis Artifex. It's Latin for the wolf artist. Because it's similar to the binomial nomenclature of, species. Canis lupus is the wolf, so Canis Artifex because I am my own species. But yes, as you mentioned, I love animals. I've worked in many settings with them. Like I mentioned, the zoo. I used to be a vet tech. And so they've always been the most inspirational thing on earth to me. I really don't have much of a spirituality aside from animal connections and bonding. I studied it a lot in college and I really think it's the most magical thing in the world. And so for me, I really try to bring the consciousness of animals to life. And that one in particular is a little crazy because I was having a dark phase. I really like animal skulls and animal physiology as well. But I really think that animals are so underappreciated because, for example, elephants have funerals. Not many people know that. Animals are incredibly intelligent. Dolphins have shown mourning. And that one was just inspired because I think antler skulls are just the coolest things ever. But if you think about it, like in some other alternate dimension, like there might be Wendigos that have huge antlers like that may come to us in nightmares, but they might exist on some other, dimensional plane. And so maybe if anything, like cannabis does influence my art in the fact that it expands my mind to consider these options. Whereas before I smoked cannabis and loved animals, none of these thoughts came to my brain. I never really thought of the spiritual value of animal connection until I started smoking cannabis, because I felt so connected to my animals and the animals around me and the birds outside, and all of that happened because of cannabis. Now, with the artist process, I typically just find dark things I'm interested in and kind of try to convey them in my own weird, somewhat comic-y style, but still kind of dark. I don't know how to define it or what to call it. It's just its own thing. But yeah, I think that animals being represented of entities of the spirit world are such a fascinating part of ancient history that people just don't think about or consider anymore because of just how natural our religions have become. And so for me, it really just speaks to how, like, I do see vultures as the bringers of death, because they circle carrion. They're nature's recyclers. They really are responsible for the starting the process of decomposition within animals. And so many things like that are just so overlooked in modern society. And I think so much healing can come from understanding and appreciating animals. So that's what I try to convey with my art.
Yes. And I love it because you're right. We see when we look at animals, we see the roles, like you mentioned, the vulture, right? And in human nature, we also have roles, but because our emotions and our behaviors are so tied in, like sometimes we don't realize that. And you mentioned the dark sides of things, right? Because without darkness, we can't see the light, and without the light, we can't see the darkness. So it's a perfect balance of both things. And we shouldn't be scared of looking at that side of life as well. And in my culture, in Nahuatl, which is one of our dialects, we would say that you are a Nahual. A Nahual is someone who is very, very close to animals spiritually, so much that we believe that you could shapeshift into different animals, whether that is seen in this consciousness or in this reality or in another reality. But most likely you are able to travel in between different realities, and most likely you do have this connection with animals for a reason. And it is so cool that something as wonderful as cannabis brought you even closer to that part of your spirituality. And one of our most famous curanderas is Sabina. I'm butchering the name, but Sabina is a very famous curandera, and she was always pictured with a big joint in her mouth, and she also was a very big advocate for animals. So I think it's really cool that your art reflects that part of you and that spirituality. I love it. And tell me a little bit about what else you're doing now with cannabis and with your art, and where we could find you if we need to get you.
Yeah, well, IG is definitely the best way to reach me. I'm on a social media break right now, but by the time this is published, I will be out and about. And so feel free to say hi. I am working on a series of paintings right now that do feature the psychedelic animals I was talking to you about, like the jaguar and the reindeer. I'm doing sketches right now, but I plan on doing my first big scale 18 by 24 watercolor paintings. That's my specialty, is watercolor. And so that's going to be very exciting. And I really do hope to do a really big painting series about my appreciation for cannabis and everything that it does bring to my life. But right now I'm just freelancing. I do cannabis marketing in tandem with my art. I don't post a lot of it because it's kind of commercial and boring, but I do cannabis marketing. I am trained as a designer, so I do graphic design, UI design, and pretty much anything digitally marketing you might need in the cannabis space, because I've done it for so long. In cannabis in California, it's a startup environment, so you learn a million different skills and kind of wear a different hat every day. So I've just been using those skills to freelance for other cannabis companies across the country, including my buddies at BuzzFeed, which is a great cannabis education website. So if you are interested in learning more about cannabis and new technology around cannabis, hit us up. I'm on there too. Come say hi. Canis Artifex on there too.
Awesome. And right now, I'm glad you plugged in BuzzFeed, because definitely you guys should check it out. Is there anything else that you want to plug in? This is the perfect time. Any friends, any other businesses, any other artists, anything that you want us to check out?
Yeah, I feel bad when you asked me this earlier. I totally should have mentioned my fiance's band, Three Towers, because I do love on the podcast that you feature Stray Rebel Bullet, who are our buddies. And so, I'll apologize to him later, but definitely check out Three Towers Band on Instagram. And lastly, the last cannabis person, because I believe cannabis education is so paramount to the industry, is my friend Javier Armas. He runs Javier's Organics and is the biggest proponent of bud tender education. He just put out a book that's, I believe, 20 or so articles that are very digestible, easy to read. He takes science, history, legislation, education, and wraps it all into one cannabis perspective. So check him out. He is awesome and a really good friend of mine, and I feel lucky to have him in my life. So I had to give him a plug because he's the best.
Yes. All right. Definitely. And we will definitely reach out to these people too, because we want to know more. And this is just one episode on cannabis. I'm sure we will have many more. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because since the moment I met Kate, she is just a phenomenal human being. You just feel attached to her. She's very real. And I really appreciate that in human beings. And it comes to show you again that maybe you might have some issues. Maybe you're dealing with anxiety. Maybe you're dealing with depression. But somehow, some way, maybe that's just your superpower that makes you so amazing. So thank you so much, Kate. You're a wonderful human being. You're a wonderful advocate. And I can't wait to be sharing with everybody all about your art. And again, thank you for coming to educate us, because we need it.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I love talking to you. I miss you. I hope we can hang out in person soon, but this was really great. And I just feel blessed that you asked me to be on. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, Kate. Till next time we have you again, Kate. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody else for listening or watching on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave some comments. Make sure to interact. And yes, I'm saying all this stuff because we're cool, man. So hang out with us. Come watch, come listen. And thank you guys so much. Happy 2021. Remember, years are transitional, but it's all about how we deal with situations and with circumstances. So I hope you have a great day. And thank you again for joining us.